Random thoughts. In this video, I'm going to discuss the story of Lwanda Magere. Now, this is a story that is very well known or has been told so many times. There are plays that have been acted. There are books that have been written about this individual, and is a story that's actually very well known, especially among the Luo and even among the rest of Kenyans. I think it was a play or something written by Omutata Okia about Lwanda Magere. Lwanda Magere is a story of a Luo soldier who had this extraordinary ability at the battlefield. And it is said that he alone could take on huge armies of the other republics or nations that surrounded the Luo people. And in particular, during his time, the Luos used to have a lot of conflicts and fights with the Jolango, who are the Nandi people. And often Lwanda Magere will come to the rescue of the Luo people. And the way it's described in the folklore is that he was a giant and he was very capable. And then he has some supernatural powers that if he was attacked, the person attacking him was definitely not going to succeed or could not succeed to hurt him. And that's because swords and spears and arrows could not penetrate his body. That is the story as it is told. Now, the story, the way it's told, when you look at that story, it's a motive actually. And motives are so common in different societies. You'll have different societies have stories that are so identical, and often that leaves people wondering what's going on. Now, before I compare the story of Lwanda Magere and another story that is also very well known, and that is the story of Samson in the Bible, I need to point out or to bring to your attention other very common motive stories. And one that stood out for me and made me very surprised is the similarity of the birth stories of, I think, four very well-known individuals throughout history, if we can call them that. And is the story of the birth of Moses in the Bible, and how that story is some extent similar to the birth of Jesus in the Bible again. And then the stories of the birth of Jesus and birth of Moses are also similar to the birth story of Romulus. And now Romulus was the founder of Rome. Again, another very well-known individual whose birth story is the same with these three is the birth story of Cyrus the Great, who we can say technically founded the Persian Empire. The four individuals have this story of being born and being thrown away and then being picked, and then of course they emerge and become great. In a video I did very recently, I also talked about how the story of creation in the Bible is so similar to the story of creation of Mumbi and Kikuyu among the Kikuyu. We can call that another motive story. And those are so common throughout human society and throughout human history. Now, back to Lwanda Magere. The similarities between the story of Lwanda Magere and Samson is very uncanny. Is very, we can say, interesting. One, both of them are soldiers of their nations. Samson is fighting for the Israelites, who at this point, we can say they were ruled by what was called the judges, if I'm not wrong. They were not yet a monarchy. And then Lwanda Magere is also fighting for his people, who, if you look at their political organization during this time, is not very much different from that of the ancient Israelites during the time of Samson. To some extent decentralized, but kind of like a federation. And then they have in both cases, there is one very, an enemy that stands out. For the Israelites during Samson's time was the Philistines. And for the Luos during Lwanda Magere's time were the Jolango, the Nandi. In both cases, the enemy is confused and unable to find out or unable to figure out how to tame this giant, because both of them are more or less considered to be giants because they are able to do extraordinary things at the battlefield. Now, in the case of Samson, of course, the Philistines decide to send him a woman, Delilah, and she comes, stays with him, and she has one task, and the task is to find out where does Samson get his powers from. The case of Lwanda Magere is the same thing. The Nandi sent him a beautiful woman. We are not given the name. Some people say there is a name. I could not find the actual name. And she has one task, and the task is to find out where does Lwanda Magere get his powers from. Now, Delilah discovers that the power of Samson was in his hair. As long as the hair was not cut, he was very powerful and he could take on any army just by himself. In the case of Lwanda Magere, the wife finds out that his power was actually in his shadow. And she discovers that through, we can say technically by accident, even though, of course, that's what she was sent out there to do. When Lwanda Magere is sick, of course, in most African societies, there was a way of administering medicine, which was pricking the skin and then rubbing in the medicine. That's how treatment was done in very many African societies, and it was the same case with the Luo. It was common that when you are sick, you are given medicine and you prick your skin and then rub it there, and then it goes into your bloodstream. Of course, just like an injection. So he is sick and he has medicine that he needs to get into his bloodstream, and he tells the wife to go to the shadow and cut it and then rub the medicine there. And then she does that, and then she realizes that blood actually comes out of the shadow. And then she realizes that Lwanda Magere has a vulnerability through his shadow. And of course, she escapes and goes and tells her people. The same case, Delilah escapes from Samson and goes and tells her people that, the way to tame this person is to have his hair cut, and she goes back and she cuts the hair. That's a little bit different, of course, in that part, because in the Lwanda Magere's story, the wife goes, she never comes back. She tells the people or her people, the Jolang or the Nandi, that if you want to finish this person, don't target his body, target his shadow. And then there is a battle that is fought, and then one of the soldiers of the Nandi Republic pierces the shadow of Lwanda Magere, and Lwanda Magere actually dies, and it is said that he became a rock. Of course, like with the case of Gikuyu and Mombi, the story I talked about in another video, we are of course left wondering, did this actually happen the way it is described in the story, or what happened? Or is this story even based on reality, or this was completely a story created completely from nothing and then told? But I tend to think that there is a figure who existed, who is Lwanda Magere, and I think he was an actual human being, an actual person who existed. But I think maybe, he was very heroic. He did marvelous things at the battlefield. But I think after his death, some things were embellished. Some things were added to the story to make him even a bigger hero. He was a hero, I think, but then, of course, things were added to that story and they became extraordinary. But then why do we have these stories that are similar in different societies? I think either one is because those stories are based on deep meaning in human existence, and this meaning, of course, cuts across all societies, or those stories have a structure that is very attractive to the human mind, and that's why they are told in so many societies in different ways, using different characters, different settings, but the story is the same story. Those are my random thoughts.